The United States started off not as the world power it is today, but as a small country desiring respect from other countries. The way early presidents of the country went about achieving this goal was by staying as neutral as possible. In their opinion, the best way to preserve the country was limiting any possibility of war. During his farewell address, George Washington himself stated, "It is our true policy to steer clear of permanent alliances with any portion of the foreign world." This statement would be the overall thesis of the early United States foreign policy. The US was still a very young country, and the leaders did not want to take any chances by forging alliances with other countries and getting pulled into wars they could not fight. This is best exemplified by the fact that they almost lost the one war they were prepared to fight. After several years of failed negotiations with Great Britain about the embargo the kingdom had placed, President James Madison declared war on the British Empire, a war that would be known as the War of 1812. The young country was confident it would succeed in the war, with Thomas Jefferson even going as far as to say invading and capturing Canada would be a mere matter of marching. Even with that confidence and the support of the people, the United States almost lost the War of 1812. The war only ended, not with total victory on either side, but when the British Empire grew tired of fighting a foreign war when there were more important domestic wars. The War of 1812 taught the United States that staying neutral is not always entirely easy and required a level head. During George Washington and John Adams' presidential terms, the French Revolution had erupted, effectively and bloodily leveling the social classes in France. The American people supported the revolution, but both President Washington and President Adams refused to give any official support to the revolution. While it looked like the revolution was going to be successful, neither president wanted to run the risk of supporting a failed revolution and creating an enemy with the old state. What followed was a series of embargoes from the British Empire and France. The British Empire did not want France to receive any sort of support, but would lower the embargo after the signing of Jay's Treaty, and the French saw the signing of Jay's Treaty as the British and the United States forging an alliance. The French Prime Minister refused to see the diplomats and demanded a $250,000 personal bribe and a $10 million loan for his financially scrapped country before he would begin peace negotiations. In fixing one problem, the United States created a different problem. What followed was the Quasi-War, a naval trade war where neither France nor the United States officially declared war. To defend its vessels and coastlines, the United States created a navy, a move initially seeming unneutral but would push France harder to negotiate. The quasi-war would only end when France, weathered by war both foreign and domestic, agreed to negotiations. The quasi-war was actually a pretty smart move by President Adams. It wore France down, and while it was not entirely bloodless, it was not an all-out war either. American soldiers did not have to fight French soldiers on the ground, just at sea. Because of this, it did not cost as much as an actual war, and most fighting was limited to skirmishes, so not many lives were lost. After the quasi-war ended, Napoleon Bonaparte was now the leader of France. Bonaparte was dangerous even to the United States. He had ambition and the intelligence to back it up. When he agreed to reopen trade with the United States, he also reacquired old French territories in the Americas from Spain. President Thomas Jefferson was cautious of this move by Bonaparte, worrying that Napoleon was planning on invading the United States. Jefferson sent diplomats to negotiate with Napoleon, aiming to at least buy the New Orleans territory from Napoleon for around $10 million. Fortunately for Jefferson and the rest of the United States, Napoleon's forces in New Orleans had been heavily reduced by disease, and several rebellions in Napoleon's territories had cost him tens of thousands of troops. When the diplomats arrived in France, ready to buy just New Orleans, they were surprised when Napoleon offered the entire Louisiana territory for $15 million. The diplomats did not have the authority to make the purchase, so they wrote to Jefferson and waited weeks for a response. This was a very unique opportunity for Thomas Jefferson. Napoleon was reeling away from several defeats. He realized he could not control the entire Louisiana territory from far away, and he wanted it gone. All these factors led to him wanting to rid himself of the Louisiana territory, so he offered the entire territory to the United States. While Jefferson preferred a literal interpretation of the Constitution, in order for him to actually purchase the territory, he had to rely on implied powers. He sacrificed his own morals to better his country and bring it forward. A similar event occurred during James Monroe's presidency. Native Americans hailing from Spanish Florida were striking at southern plantations and farms, freeing slaves and causing numerous problems. Monroe knew he could use his hostility as an excuse to possibly gain Spanish Florida as a territory. Monroe ordered Andrew Jackson to stop the Native American raids in vague orders. Jackson interpreted those intentionally vague orders to mean to invade Spanish Florida and deal with the Native Americans. He met little to no Spanish resistance and dealt with the Native Americans handily, highlighting the fact that the Spanish had little control over the territory. Spain relinquished control over Spanish Florida in exchange for some claims in California and Texas. Monroe made a very gutsy move by invading Spanish Florida in the way that he did. How he gave vague orders to Jackson allowed him to easily pass the blame of the invasion straight to Jackson if Spain cried for war. In fact, he still passed the blame on to Jackson. Foreign diplomats and some congressmen demanded that Jackson be repudiated and punished for his unauthorized invasion. Monroe pushing the Spanish out of the United States' sphere of influence was the type of behavior that led to the Monroe Doctrine. As Oxford puts it, Monroe believed the Old World and the New World were fundamentally different and should be two different spheres of influence. This line of thought led to his foreign policy speech during an annual address to Congress. Monroe proclaimed that the United States would be the unilateral protector of the Americas and would prevent any more European colonization from taking place. The Monroe Doctrine was more of a grandstanding gesture than any sort of official promise. Since the U.S. lacked the military power to back it up, the Monroe Doctrine went largely ignored by the greater European countries. Even still, the Monroe Doctrine marked a turning point in the country's foreign policy, where it no longer avoided alliances but still sought to avoid war. The United States attempted to solve its problems with diplomacy first and war second. They only went to war when it was truly required, so they avoided any sort of permanent alliances that would force them into a war. It was because of this reliance on diplomacy and its distance from the European powers that the United States was able to eventually blossom into the world power it is today.